Hello and welcome to Converge. I'm your host, Betsy Melin. It's 2015, and according to a Pew Research study, almost 60% of Americans say that the U.S. still has to make major changes before we can achieve true equality. As Loyola students, we try to lead that change, but we can't fix anything unless we know what the problems are. So what does inequality look like today, and what are we doing to try to stop it? On this episode, Converge will talk to students and Chicago organizations that are trying to make a difference. We'll learn how even a simple phrase can be laced with prejudice. Next, we'll sit down with April Callan from the Chicago Foundation for Women. She'll tell us what they are doing to close the pay gap and what female college students should do now to prepare for their first job. We'll check in with Anthony Siss from Loyola's Queer and Trans People of Color student group. He'll talk to us about transgender and gay rights issues on campus. And later, a panel of Loyola students share how they pursue justice. But first, Converge correspondent Blake Keller asks our fellow Ramblers, how do you define equality?
So in your own words, how do you define equality?
I think a lot of it is holding everyone to the same expectations that you would hold yourself.
Looking at things equally and not having your own preconceived notions.
When you have the same rights for the same people.
You receive the same amount of money for something or the same amount of opportunities for something.
Like treating everyone the same way and in the way that you would want to be treated.
When it gets down to it is actually making sure that everybody gets the same opportunities.
At Loyola, women make up almost 65% of the student body. Soon these students will enter the workforce. The pay gap between men and women is an inequality many will face. Converge correspondent Grace Runkle spoke with the Chicago Foundation for Women, which is working to bridge the pay gap and end gender bias.
You probably know that women make, on average, 77 cents to every dollar a man makes. But did you know that here in Chicago that number falls to 65 cents? The Chicago Foundation for Women is working to change that with their plan, the 100% Project.
Thank you, April. Thanks for joining us today. So why don't you start out by telling us why gender bias and the pay gap is still an issue today in 2015?
I would say it's still an issue in 2015 because no one's done anything yet. So Chicago Foundation for Women, we decide to assess, really, what are some of the issues facing women and girls today? So in the conversations we've had with the community, we learned that it's economic insecurity that is a large issue, and that's due to the pay gap and gender bias. So that's what we want to take on and sort of hopefully push people and move them along to finally do something about it, because it is 2015 and still hasn't changed yet.
And how can Loyola students, or any college student for that matter, get involved in the 100% Project?
Well, we are encouraging people to visit our website, www.cfw.org, and actually share your ideas. Like I said, that gender bias and inequity looks very different depending on the population. So we would love to know, what are college students faced with? What are some of their concerns around gender bias? Is it a matter of feeling like as a young woman that you aren't able to speak up in class, or if you do speak up, that someone's talking over you? Or for young men, do you see women differently? We would love to know those things and really make the 100% Project fit for you all as well.
And at Loyola, we're all college students, we're all getting ready to enter the workforce. Why is this something that we really need to be paying attention to?
Because most likely you're going to be faced with it. Unfortunately, bias is a major issue and it affects all of us in many ways. And so I think understanding sort of what you're up against or what to be aware of, you can better advocate for yourself. The more that you know about bias and understand that it's there and aware of it, that it goes beyond having a degree, sadly a college degree, and having the experience isn't enough, and it doesn't always help you with bias, but educating yourself about it and sort of developing tools to address it can really help you advocate for yourself.
So what exactly are you guys doing to kind of speed up the process to close the gap?
We came out with the 100% Project. We're calling it an all-out, all-in effort to end gender bias and increase economic security by 2030. So we're engaging partners across sectors and nonprofit, other foundations, government, all kinds of leadership to really join us in this effort to end gender bias. But really we can't do much until we get more partners and we have more people engaged. So really the success of the 100% Project is 100% dependent on everyone getting involved.
Thank you so much for joining us today, April, and good luck with the 100% Project.
Thank you.
Grace, is there anything our fellow female Ramblers can do now to advocate for themselves?
Absolutely. April's #1 piece of advice was to start networking, getting in touch with those women who are already professionals in the workplace, leaders in the office. She said talking to them about their experience and seeing what kind of obstacles they faced is the best way to prepare yourself. And you can do that by attending networking events or even just adding people on LinkedIn is a good way to start.
Thanks so much, Grace. Ever wonder what life is like for an undocumented Loyola student? We'll see how their lives compare to their fellow Ramblers. The similarities may surprise you.
I do identify as an undocumented student.
I'm a first-generation college student.
I do not identify as an American. I somewhat have a struggle with identity.
I identify as 100% American as I was born here.
I run the student-to-student support group for undocumented students called UP, Undocumented and Proud.
I am in the interdisciplinary honors program, so I work with interdisciplinary honors residents.
An undocumented student to me is anybody who is studying, who is getting their education, but does not have the proper documentation to identify as a United States citizen or resident.
Being a first-generation student, my family, they have these high expectations for me academically.
Being undocumented has affected my academic life, mainly because being at Loyola, it takes a lot of financial need to be here. I don't receive federal financial aid or state aid.
I didn't think about paying for college until it started getting closer. And I did have to take out student loans to come here, and I still am.
Now, the American dream I really don't think exists, or it may vary from person to person. But to me, it's just a lifestyle. It's just always giving the best that you can to achieve what you want.
I find myself really having to fight for what I want.
Racism isn't as obvious as people think. Slights and snubs leave deep wounds. These are known as microaggressions. Converge correspondent Elise Haas sat down with Loyola students to talk about this disturbing trend. Microaggressions are negative comments that are often directed towards people of color. And even though these comments may be unintentional, they still hurt. So I sat down with 2 students to talk about what it's like to deal with microaggressions on a daily basis.
A lot of times people say to me like, "Oh my gosh, you're just so sassy." And I think that's one that a lot of other Black females in particular could relate to, because it just kind of points to this one-dimensional type of depiction of Black femininity.
One time I got, "You have a nice ass for an Asian." Another one that I really love is that you look, or like you seem white, or you act white, or I don't see you as Asian because you act white, or your English is really good. So it's just interesting the way that people perceive me, or they're like, "What are you?"
And that's exactly what microaggressions are. So they're slights that either unintentional or intentional kind of undermine a lot of marginalized identities.
With microaggressions, it's really on how you treat people on a day-to-day basis and the things that come out during everyday interactions that a lot of people don't realize are being said to begin with.
That's the thing about microaggressions, I think, is that they are small, but they're so significant because it illuminates a larger thought process that isn't okay.
It's just ignorance, and it's just people not being educated and not having, I guess, the understanding that while white Americans obviously come from so many different backgrounds, so many different upbringings, but they don't apply that to people of other races. People of color are being seen as different and are being seen as set apart from white America.
When someone does have the courage to say, "You know what, this wasn't okay to say," or "This really offended me," when you said, like, expressed this microaggression, that's going to create an opportunity for them to, like, maybe go a little bit deeper. Like, why is it that I said that?
And I think bringing awareness about the microaggressions really raises awareness as to how we can treat other people and being aware of the way that we treat certain populations.
It's going to take time to rectify, but that it's not going to be possible if not everyone is taking accountability for themselves, their actions, and their words.
I think that once people start realizing about people having multiple cultures and multiple identities and understanding that they can exist in one body and one person.
So Elise, what's your advice for students who might not know if their actions are microaggressions?
I think the students need to take the time to become aware of different cultures and different backgrounds and just understand that just because someone might look a certain way, they can't stereotype them to be, one size fit all type of thing.
And what would you say to students who may think that, oh, this doesn't really matter, people are being too sensitive?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest issue. They think that, oh, I didn't mean to, it's very unintentional, or it might even just be a joke. But the thing is that students need to realize is that these are comments that are said to these individuals on a daily basis, and after 21, 22 years, that can definitely build up and be very hurtful.
Thanks so much, Elise. Blake Keller asks students, what equality issues are most important to you?
And what is the most pressing issue in equality today?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind right now, just because of the recent attacks in Paris, is probably religion and race.
With feminists and women, with just how they're looked at and treated.
There's just so many. It's really hard to just pick one.
There's so much inequality in America right now that it's like inconceivable that it happens every single day.
People need more of something to achieve the same thing because not everyone has the same privileges. So I think people need to focus on, we can't achieve equality without talking about equity.
The LGBTQIA community at Loyola has a safe place to call home with the group Queer and Trans People of Color. Converge correspondent Patrick Grabarczyk spent some time at our Lakeshore campus to learn more about the organization.
I'm Patrick Grabarczyk, reporting for Converge. Today I'll be speaking with Anthony Sis, Graduate Assistant for LGBTQIA Student Initiatives here at Loyola. We're at the offices of Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs, where we'll discuss the group Queer and Trans People of Color.
The goal is really to just provide a safe space for queer and or trans people of color to have a space where they can talk about those identities and the intersectionality of what it means to be a part of the queer community and or trans person of color community as well.
So the community now includes its LGBTQIA. Can you define for us the I and the A?
Yeah, so within Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs, we use the I and the A to mean intersex and asexual. So to acknowledge the fact that those are kind of identities within the LGBTQ community that are kind of seen as either even further marginalized or not discussed very often. We want to basically just kind of give acknowledgement to folks who identify as such within the Loyola community.
Some people feel that the word queer is offensive. I've heard people say that, but then other people, I think, especially younger generations now, are putting a more positive spin on it.
Queer, I think, in previous generations has definitely been used as a way to kind of further marginalize and stigmatize LGBTQI individuals, but I think now there's kind of this kind of reincorporating that terminology and to have it mean something much more positive, so turning a negative, traditionally negative term in the past into something much more reaffirming and kind of a way to empower the rest of the community as well.
What are the biggest issues that students bring to the table when they come into the space?
Well, I mean, I think definitely relevant to the conversation recently has been kind of the situation that's been happening in Mizzou, and just kind of the situation and the fact that there are a lot of students who still experience racism inside and outside of the classroom on college campuses, and so I think that's definitely relevant to the conversations being brought up among queer and trans people of color.
Are students bringing a lot of concern about being bullied or discriminated against on campus? Is that an issue that you're hearing people talk about?
I don't think it's so much that people are being bullied or discriminated. I think a lot of it has to simply do with just tiny microaggressions or acts of, just simply marginalizing students even further among day-to-day conversations, interactions that they have with professors, with students. And I think when you multiply multiple identities that have traditionally been marginalized and you experience that on a day-to-day basis with all these other identities, which often happen 2, 3, 4 times a day, times 7 if they live on campus, 7 days a week, it tends to be very overwhelming. So I think a space like QT-POC is really great just to know that other students are experiencing these same struggles, but that they're also being affirmed in their own identities as well.
If there was someone that you were sitting with who still didn't really understand the community as a whole, what's one thing that you would say to them just to sort of enlighten them a little bit about the people in this community?
I think at the end of the day, we're all people. And I think just going back to kind of Loyola as being a Catholic institution, and one of the principles of the Catholic social teachings is human dignity, right? So just acknowledging the fact that every human has a right to live, has a right to exist, and just acknowledging the fact that at the end of the day, we all bleed the same blood, it's all the same color, and that we're all humans at the end of the day, regardless of wherever background we come from or whatever identities we're a part of.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Anthony.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Patrick, it was really interesting to hear Anthony tie in the Jesuit mission to QT Pac's message.
Right, so the mission of Loyola really transcends the generations, so to speak. And I liked how they pull this in and speak to integrity for all, and that leads to equality. So I think this group is really on the right path with pulling that mission in and then finding their own place here at the university.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Sure, you're welcome.
University of Missouri students and the Concerned Student 1950 movement rallied against the school's policies regarding minority students on November 9th. 3 days later, Loyola University took its own national call to action against racial injustice on college campuses.
You know, we had already planned on standing in solidarity with the students at the University of Missouri, but we also, understood the importance of connecting that to a larger issue, which would be racism in higher education. Honestly, before the demonstration happened, we said that we would be happy if over 50 people showed up, and then we ended up getting over 700 people at the demonstration. With Loyola, especially being a Jesuit institution that holds itself to a higher standard than most public institutions, as well as being an institution that prides itself and markets itself as a diverse institution, and in our current state with a population of 4.8% of black students, we presented 14 demands to our university president, to our administration, and to our board of trustees. It's only fair to what they're preaching, to their Jesuit values, and to their black students and the rest of the student body to make these changes in order to make it a better institution.
Support each other. We have nothing to lose but our change. We have nothing to lose but our change.
In this show, we've seen what inequality looks like. Now, we'll talk to Loyola students who are trying to make a change on campus. Joining me now is Nicole Camacho, the Council of Pan-Asian Americans President, Mahdi Sahul, Vice President of the organization Students Organized for Syria, and Julian Marshall, a lead organizer of Loyola's Stand with Mizzou rally. So Nicole, can you tell me more about what your organization does here on campus?
We really focus on the Asian American experience of the Loyola experience. We ensure that the culture and heritage is being shared, as well as making sure social justice issues pertaining to our community is being told, and ensuring that students get the proper resources they need to succeed at Loyola.
Mahdi, what does Students Organized for Syria do?
We're a student-run organization that stands in solidarity with the Syrian people in their struggle for democracy and liberty, and we just want to raise awareness about it on campus, and hopefully that will translate into some action in the future.
Julian, what do you do here on campus?
So I am one of the lead organizers of the Loyola Standing in Solidarity with Mizzou. I'm also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, a historically African-American fraternity dedicated to really making sure that men of color, especially black men, have a space that is all their own on campus and in the world.
How can students here at Loyola get involved?
Students at Loyola could get involved by reaching out to the Students Organized for Syria, reaching out to the various NGOs around the Chicagoland area that work inside Syria and in neighboring countries, and just sharing some articles on Syria, educating themselves on the origins of the revolution and how it escalated into one of the worst humanitarian conflicts of our generation.
So how can students get more involved with Black Lives Matter issues here on campus?
And the most basic way is just standing up for what is right and correcting those students around you when they bring in microaggressions or they say something that is completely inappropriate and insensitive. On the larger scale, students can attend demonstrations all throughout the city of Chicago. Students can take a stance on social media. And it's just really a shift in the way of thinking. And you start to think, well, if I'm having this experience, someone else probably is too, and it's my responsibility to make sure that that never happens again. So,
Nicole, what would you say is the most important issue, social justice-wise, facing students today?
I definitely think that the issue is making sure the accurate narratives are being told. A lot of people don't stand up for what is being put in history. Me being Asian American, I definitely believe that if we were more active in ensuring that our stories are being told, making a comfortable space for those stories being told and really embracing someone's heritage and history, then it would help bring more equality and solidarity.
Madi, what do you think is the most important issue right now?
The lack of awareness about conflicts like Syria, the Black Lives Matter campaign. You know, I recently attended the rally in support of the students at Mizzou, and I was just amazed by the amount of diversity at the protest, which really made me happy. It was, I would say, somewhat of a life-changing experience. It encouraged me to read more about the Black Lives Matter campaign and, you know, reach out to organizations here in the Chicagoland community that are doing work with underdeveloped communities. You know, I think it's really important to stand in solidarity with organizations that have similar interests, similar goals. So I look forward to working with organizations that believe in peace, inequality, and justice.
Julian, what would you say to people who think, oh, well, my race doesn't affect me, so it's not something I need to look into and explore?
I would think to those students, I would say that your race always matters because that's your history, that's your heritage. But there are some students who may not be as impacted by, you know, the struggles that come from, you know, their racial identity, and I think that's acceptable. But for those students that are affected by their racial identity, I think it's important that those students be able to find a space on campus where they are protected. And as it currently stands, those spaces are so very limited. Even the administration really cannot protect its students because of the demonstration policy that's in place. Those students don't have a voice. And so for those students who are impacted by their racial identity and want to use their voice to call attention to that, you know, the university has policies in place that hinder that. And so that, I think, is a problem as well.
What do you think the administration could do to make it easier for people to find safe spaces?
Students of color are not the majority on campus, and oftentimes you find one or two people of color in every classroom, and so those students normally get isolated and feel as if, you know, they have to carry the weight of their racial identity and their heritage on their shoulders, and that's a problem.
Nicole, do you think there's other things the administration could be doing?
Being a minority student, it was really hard for me to find myself reflected in the administration and the faculty, and I was having a difficulty relating. How can someone understand my story if I feel like I'm not reflected in the university I attend to? So I definitely think that Loyola could do a better job in providing resources for students who are going into industries and fields where being of color is a minority.
I'd like to ask that the university instill a back-to-school program for Syrian refugees being resettled here in Chicago. I think as a university that prides itself on social justice, equality, and inclusion of all races and ethnicities, they have an obligation to welcome refugees to the Loyola community.
So, Madi, Governor Rauner recently announced that he will not allow Syrian refugees into Illinois. What do you say about that?
You know, when I hear that Governor Rauner wants to halt the resettling of Syrian refugees here in America, I ask our lawmakers to look back at our great nation's history and look at the Pilgrims and the Puritans. They were escaping religious persecution, and they came to the United States for religious freedom, to practice religious freedom. So we ask them to take that into account, and you know, we have to look at the impact of refugees on society. Not many people know that Steve Jobs is the son of a Syrian refugee, and his impact on communication, technology is enormous. And you know, without him, we wouldn't have our iPhones or iPads or Macs. That's I just ask that Governor Rauner, you know, just look at those details before making such a bold statement, such as halting the resettling process in America for Syrian refugees.
Julian, final thoughts?
Thank you again for having me, and I think my final thoughts would be that the university needs to take a stance and protect its students of color instead of leaving them subject to the targeting and the terrorism and the terror that they face on a daily basis in their classes, in their walk between classes, and their dealings with other students.
Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you.
Now, it's your turn to join the conversation. Visit our Facebook page, Converge LUC, and our Twitter handle, Converge LUC Talk, and use the hashtag equality. I'd like to thank all of our guests, our studio audience, and all of you watching the show online, as well as our Converge team of writers, producers, and correspondents. I'm Betsy Melin. Thanks for watching the premiere season of our show, and be sure to join us again next time we Converge.